humans, we've been making containers for things for a long time. As a matter of fact, one of the most accurate ways that archaeologists have of dating a site is by looking at the pottery shards that they find there. How thick are the walls of the pottery? What kinds of decorations were used on it? How was it glazed and fired? Pottery, of course, eventually gave way to glass bottles, and glass bottles gave way to plastic containers. And I know that there are people who will say that the internet is the crowning achievement of our generation, but I'd say it's a pretty darn close contest between the internet and this. I mean, really? A ketchup bottle with a lid on the bottom so you don't have to turn it upside down and shake it? Let me meet the person who came up with this idea and shake their hand. There are a lot of ways to talk about the creation story that we find at the very beginning of scriptures, but one way is to talk about it as a story of custom-made containers. In recent years, the creation story has kind of been a hotbed of controversy. Just exactly how did it happen? Did it happen the way we believe the Bible talks about it? 6 24-hour days, about 6,000 years ago? Or do we follow the teachings of science, which suggests that the Earth is much older and that the creatures that we know now are a result of evolution, or that the world was created through a big bang? And so as we put this text in front of ourselves and begin to talk about it, those arguments sometimes distract us from the beautiful point that the story is really trying to make. The fact of the matter is, the how of creation is not really what the author is trying to talk to us about. The story as it's been handed down to us is about the who of creation. Who created everything and why? I mean, the questions that we ask this text to answer when we're trying to date the dinosaurs or discover the origin of the Big Bang, that's kind of like going to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet as a source book for the Italian Renaissance culture. I mean, you might glean some little facts and nuggets out of there, but that's not what the story is about. It's about love and hatred and which is stronger. It's about the tragedy that happened when cultures collide. And the creation story in Genesis is intended to talk to us about the nature of God, the nature of human beings, and how those natures interact. The first thing you notice when you read the book of Genesis and this creation narrative is how incredibly structured it is. There's a sort of repetitive pattern as the story unfolds around the 7 days of creation, in particular the first 6 days of creation. There's a formula that is used. First of all, God speaks something into existence. Let there be light. Let there be. And then we have a description of the thing that he has made. And then at the end of each section, he saw it and it was good. And there was evening and there was morning. The first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day. This pattern repeats itself 6 times during the creation narrative until finally we come to the end of the passage and the Sabbath day. But there's more structure even than that, because the first 3 days are about something and the next 3 days are about something else. The first 3 days of creation, God makes spaces. He makes containers, if you will, pots, vessels. He begins with the heavens and then goes on to what the author describes as waters above and waters below, which is the sky and the sea. And then he talks about the creation of the land. And the land as it is created includes the vegetation that grows out from it. And that's the first 3 days, and each time at the end of one of those days he saw it and it was good, and evening and morning the first day, evening and morning the second day, evening and morning the third day. And then in the fourth day, if you pay careful attention, you realize that he is looping back around to the containers that he has made, and he is filling them. He fills the space of the heavens with the sun and the moon, who will rule over the heavens and help us keep track of days and nights and weeks and years and holy seasons. I love the throwaway passage in here. He created the sun to rule the day, and he created the moon to rule the night. Oh, and he created the stars. And on the author goes as though he created the stars was, you know, he dropped a gum wrapper, or, oh, and he found a penny on the sidewalk. He created the stars, the expanse of the night sky, and what Carl Sagan told us were billions and billions of worlds out there. Oh, and he created some stars. He created, and they filled the heavens. Next, he fills the waters of the sky and the sea with birds and fishes. And then he fills the land with wild animals and livestock and all those creepy crawly things that defy definition. First, for 3 days, he makes containers. And then for the second 3 days, he fills them with light and life. And each time at the end of each day, he saw it and it was good, and there was evening and there was morning. The fourth day, there was evening, there was morning, and it was the fifth day, until he gets to day 6, and then the story breaks its pattern. God creates the creatures of the land, both wild and domestic, and insects and snakes and all that stuff as well. And he sees it, and it was good. But then the pattern breaks. It's almost like one of those old infomercials on TV where they're showing you a product, and then all of a sudden, but there's more. He saw it and it was good, and then the text pauses and starts back up again as God creates human beings and discovers that yes, they too are good. So up until this point in the story, right, God has simply spoken a thing and it's happened. It just seems to kind of appear. Or the other thing that he's done is he's created things by separating the land from the sea, or separating the sky from the water, organizing. But now for the very first time, a different word emerges in the text when he talks about the creation of human beings. The word made, fashioned. He took, we read in chapter 2, some clay, some of the earth of the ground, and he molded it into a thing. It's such an intimate act, isn't it, to work with your hands and create something. He made humanity like a potter would fashion a pot. He took clay and he created a vessel. Because that's been the story throughout, hasn't it? That God makes a space and then he fills it. He creates a container and then he pours something in. He makes human beings in his image, like an empty vessel. And then he breathes his spirit into them. He's created a container for the very essence of his life. Or as it says in chapter 1, which we read today, He created them in His own image. And this is an incredibly powerful picture we've been given of what it means to be human. And it's a picture that powers much, probably most, maybe even arguably everything that happens in the Bible from this point forward is about what it means to live as a vessel of God's Spirit, what it means to live as something that was created in His image, what it means to live as spiritual beings, vessels crafted by God to hold light and life. We have centuries of writing in our Holy Scriptures that point us towards how to live out that reality. But if all we had was this one story, it would still tell us a lot. So the first thing we know just from this account is we're creative. We're made to be creative. We're made to make things, and we do, don't we? I mean, look around you. Probably most everything you cast your eyes on is something that humans have fashioned with their hands, have made themselves, and we're endlessly creative, right? We're always making new and different kinds of things. But the most striking thing about God's creativity is that He speaks things into existence, that just by saying it, it becomes real. As people made in God's image, we have this power too. Maybe don't think you do. Maybe that sounds like, Harry Potter or the world of magic, but in fact, we speak things into existence all the time. Every time we speak to each other, the tone of voice we use, the words we choose, changes the world. It reshapes the relationships between us. We can speak love into existence. We can speak hatred into existence. We can speak justice into existence. We can speak apathy into existence. And finally, for the sermon, finally, for the text, not finally, it was one of the first things we learned in the text. We learn from this text that we're good. That was God's judgment on everything He made, right? It is good. He looked at it, He saw it, and it was good. And on that sixth day, He actually says good 3 times. He says that the land animals are good, and then twice when He created humans. It's the emphatic. It gets translated in the English Bible to very good, but it's actually good. They're good is what they are. He was happy with how we turned out. Now, we are fallen. We don't get to skip chapter 3, in which we learn about sin entering into the world and all the consequences of that. But we need to always remember that that's not how God made us. That's what we became through the tragedy of the fall. We sing some of the old hymns of the church. Alas, and did my Savior bleed, and did my Sovereign die? Did He devote that sacred head for such a worm as I? It was the original wording. I'm glad the Methodist hymnal smoothed that over a little bit, to be honest with you, because God didn't make us worms. Fallen, yes. Flawed, oh yeah. Broken, even. But at the core, at the essence, the way I was created, good. One of the big philosophical questions across the centuries has been what we call the problem of evil. How is it that if God is good, that that bad things happen, that evil exists in the world? How can you reconcile Adolf Hitler with a good God? C.S. Lewis writes and puts the shoe on the other foot, what he calls the problem of good. If there's not a good God in the world, how do you account for the fact that we are always looking for goodness? What sense does it even make to say that there's a contradiction between things, how things ought to be and how they are, unless we know internally somehow, I understand inside me, in my gut, this is not right. It's the problem of good. Where did good come from? Where it came from, and how we recognize it. It came from the hand of the God that created us, and we recognize it because it's still down in us somewhere, however much of our junk we may have piled over the top of it. We lean towards goodness. We strive towards goodness. We want to rekindle the good image of God which is inside us. What would the world look like if tomorrow morning we all woke up and when we looked at ourselves in the mirror, we sincerely believed that we were looking at something beautiful and good? How would the world change if every person we came in contact with tomorrow we saw as someone beautiful and inherently good? Flawed? Yeah. But good. My son introduced me to a Jewish folk tale. I'm pretty sure I won't tell it nearly as well as he did. But the story goes like this. There is a man living in a small village who's becoming weary of life. He's been devout his entire life, always tried to serve God. His wife, who was beautiful when she was younger, is not as pretty as she used to be, and she's a little bit demanding now. And the kids, oh my goodness, the kids. Now, every parent loves their children, but oh, the kids are noisy and unruly. They don't know how to behave. He can never find a quiet moment in the house. The neighbors are nosy, always wondering what's going on in his business and in his life. His house is too small. He longs for more. And he just comes to realize that, his life is not headed anywhere. And so he goes to the rabbi in his village and he says, "Rabbi, I've been devout. I've been a godly man. I've adhered to the Torah. I want to see heaven. I don't want to die and go to heaven. I want to see heaven right now. It's got to be somewhere. Can you tell me how to get there?" And the rabbi says, "Well, no, nobody really knows." And he says, "Rabbi, anything, a rumor, anything." And the rabbi says, "Well, I have heard stories." He said, "I have heard that if you can leave on the first day of the week, at sunup on the first day of the week, and you can walk following the river upstream all day long, thinking only of the glory and goodness of God. And if you can do this for 6 days, following the river for 6 days, thinking throughout the daylight hours only of the goodness and glory of God, that when you awake on the Sabbath day, you will be in heaven." Well, it sounded far-fetched, doesn't it? But it also sounded like worth a try. So the man begins to prepare. He knows he's going to have to pack his food. He's going to have to pack some clothes and other provisions. He also knows he's going to have to prepare himself spiritually, because this idea of thinking only about God all day long, he began to memorize some scriptures. He began to spend a little bit more time in prayer. And on the morning of the first day of the week, he sets off on his journey. And all day long, he follows the river, just following the river, constantly in prayer, constantly thinking the things of God. And it's hard work to follow a river through the woods and keep your mind on something else. And so he was always afraid when he went to sleep at night that he would wake up and not know which direction he was supposed to go. And so he devised a plan before he took off on the trip that every night he would take his shoes off and he would point them in the direction he'd been walking that day. So when he got up the next morning and began thinking about only things of God, he would just have to put his feet back in his shoes and keep walking in the same direction. He did this for 3 days. On the evening of the third day, according to the folk tale, there was a trickster that wandered through the forests. And he came upon the man's camp, and he saw the shoes sitting by the stream, and he guessed what they were there for. So he flipped them around to point them the other way. And the next morning, the man got up. After 3 days of walking into the wilderness up the river, he put his feet into his shoes, and thinking of nothing but the things of God, began to walk in the direction that his shoes had been pointing, never realizing that he had done an about face. And after 3 days, he went to sleep in the evening. He woke up on the Sabbath morning, and he discovered that he was in paradise. Just a few steps down the river from where he had slept, he entered a village that he immediately knew was where he belonged. It was familiar somehow to him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. And he was surrounded by angels who were asking caring questions about what was going on in his life. And then he came to a pathway, and instinctively he knew this must be my place. And he went to his heavenly reward, a little house. Not too big, but not too little either, just right, perfectly homey. And as he entered the house, there were cherubs running back and forth, playing and laughing and singing with one another. And he made his way to the kitchen and saw the most beautiful angel he had ever seen in his entire life. And she greeted him with a warm smile and wrapped her arms around him. And he dwelt in heaven every day for the rest of his life. How would the world change if we woke up tomorrow morning believing that we were surrounded by people who were good, people who had been created in the image of God? If somehow we saw beyond the imperfections of the world to the beauty that God originally created, how would the world change if we began to speak into existence light and life? For the time that we spend here, it will always be a broken place, and we will always be broken people. But we are broken people who've been created with a purpose, and who deep in our core are loved and cherished by the God who made us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, let God's people say, Amen.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time, into the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. Creation still obeys you, so will I. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, you chase down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to